Well, hello everyone. I'm Maritza Barone and welcome to my podcast, Things You Can't Unhear. Today we have an exceptional woman with us to dig deep into the ideals of diversity and inclusion. Her name is Lilian Kikuvi and she's a speaker and consultant with an obsession to help individuals and organisations achieve success through diversity and inclusion, which is all influenced by her lived experience as a Kenyan Australian. She arrived here in Australia in 1999 and entered a whole new world where she started living as a racial minority after spending her whole life being part of a majority group in Kenya. Today we are going to talk about how she brings in tribal frameworks with 5 African tribal principles or strategies that she uses as tools to embrace our differences. We talk about what masks we wear, not only as a racial minority, but any person out there who is not living their authentic selves. Lilian is an exceptional woman who is bridging the gap for so many people. Thank you and welcome to the show, Lilian. We can't wait to dig deep into your story.
Thank you for having me. What a pleasure.
Now, when you moved to Australia in 1999 from Kenya, your whole world as you knew it changed. Firstly, tell us about how you lived in Kenya, what your upbringing was like there, and what your life was like before you made the big move to Australia.
My upbringing in Kenya was dynamic and exciting, and it was eclectic as well. So, like many Kenyan families, we had a modern upbringing as well as a traditional upbringing. So the modern upbringing was more like a lot of the Australian families here, where we grew up in the urban cities and we had access to a lot of the amenities that we have here. For example, education, transport, infrastructure, everything that we have, most of the things that we have here, I got to enjoy and access. But at the same time, it was very different, particularly around the traditional aspect. Now, I grew up in a family unit that was very strong. It's still very strong. I'm part of a family of 6, including my parents. I'm the eldest of four siblings, and we had the privilege of, being around traditional concepts because our parents were also very traditional. And what that meant for us was that they raised us according to African tribal principles. And what was quite interesting about my parents is that they come from 2 different tribes. So we have about 43 tribes in Kenya. And it's very normal for tribal groups to intermarry. And my parents are from 2 separate tribes. They're like chalk and cheese. Mm-hmm. So for us as children, we had to learn very quickly how to navigate the complexities of the 2 different tribes. We also that's where I actually learned the importance of inclusivity, because it wasn't about being part of one tribe only, but I also had to learn my mother's tribe and the principles that surround that, the cultural practices as well as my father's tribe. So that just really enriched my upbringing. At the same time, my paternal grandfather was a polygamist. So that means that I have 3 grandmothers, which made Christmas very interesting.
Very interesting.
Very interesting. And I loved it. There was always lots of people at the Christmas gathering. And my mom is also from a very big family, not a polygamous family, but a very big family. So for me, being part of a community was my upbringing, and there was so much love and there was so much collaboration. But one thing that stood the constant, despite the diversity that existed between the 2 tribal groups, was that we were raised according to African tribal principles that governed every part of our lives. It was basically the life philosophy that we followed as children, and this is what our elders also did, and our ancestors as well. So that was my upbringing.
Yeah, I can't wait to get into what those principles are and how you've brought them into what you teach today. But in the meantime, before we get to that, did you experience any exclusion at all during that time in Kenya between the tribes that you were part of?
So it wasn't exclusion per se. There's something called tribalism. So when you think about stereotypes that exist in different groups, for example, in Australia, we have something similar back home. So if you belong to a particular tribe, there's stereotypes that are attached to that. And unfortunately, there's also a bias that goes along with that. So that was the experience for a lot of people growing up. For example, if you met somebody for the first time, one of the very first few questions that they ask you is, after your name and where you come from and all of that, they ask you about your tribe. And that's really part of your identity, which is good in one part, but at the same time, if somebody is looking at you or judging you based on stereotypes, and that works against you. So that was the encounter, and that was for me that actually opened up my eyes about exclusion and prejudice that comes with being different or not belonging to a particular group.
Well, when you came to Australia in '99, how were you treated initially by the community around you?
So I came in 1999. I went straight to Wollongong Uni, and that was my first experience in Australia. And I actually say this in my keynote presentations. Landing in Australia made me realize that I was Black, and it's a funny thing. It's ridiculous for some people because I'm obviously Black, but I was never aware of the color of my skin. It wasn't something that was front of mind for me. So yeah, so I was always part of the majority, and it's just like, okay, this is how we live. This is who I am. And then all of a sudden, I looked different. It was visibly different. I was visibly different, but at the same time, that difference was not a good thing to some people because I was treated differently. I was treated negatively because of the color of my skin. Some people were warm, welcoming, excited, curious, opened their doors. There was a lot of inclusivity, but at the same time, there was a lot of discrimination. And that was something that I was not prepared for because I'd never been a racial minority in my life. And that was a thing that really disrupted my identity because I had a very strong identity where I came from. I grew up with African tribal principles. I understood my culture very well. I knew what tribe I belonged to. I knew what family I belonged to. I knew what ancestral group I belonged to. That was very clear. So I had a very strong sense of identity until I came here and then was treated less than others because of my racial identity. And that was the beginning of my mindset and my self-perception being corrupted.
How did it affect your mindset?
The mindset was affected negatively because I started looking at my racial identity as a problem because other people treated it as a problem, and I started looking at it in that same way. And because I was young and I was ill-equipped to deal with the issues that came with racial discrimination, I just thought I would be able to ride out the issues and I'll be fine. But like a disease, it slowly started creeping in and started infecting many areas of my life over a number of years. And I started compromising myself. I started trying my best to hide whatever I could of my racial identity in order to belong.
You came here with high hopes, and you came here to learn to Australia. At what age were you when you came, and did you come with your family?
No, I came here on my own. So I was 10 to 20 years old, and I came here on my own. And I was very excited. I felt very well prepared for this amazing adventure ahead of me. And I remember being the reason why I felt prepared because I'd been in boarding school pretty much most of my life. So I was so used to having that independence. I was so used to being resourceful and being resilient. And also one of my strengths is connectedness. So making friends and connecting with different people was not a problem. So I felt excited and well prepared. So when I came here at the age of 20, leaving my whole family back in Kenya, I thought I'd be okay. And then I realized later down the track that I was not okay.
Absolutely. Now, you said you hid part of yourself. You hid part of who you were. When it comes to protecting ourselves, we do hide who we are, whether it's through different methods. Many of us do it to ourselves. Do you agree that that causes so much internal damage to us?
Absolutely, I agree. I mean, I can talk. I can talk about my personal experience. There was a lot of internal damage because I actually talk about masks. I started wearing masks to belong, and I don't know whether you've heard this from psychologist Abraham Maslow. He talks about the hierarchy of human needs, and belonging is the third most important need in the hierarchy of human needs. So for me, it was about masking to belong. And because I was experiencing negativity because of my racial identity, then it was important that I masked to belong. For me, that was a priority then. And it was damaging. It was damaging mentally. It was damaging physically. It damaged a lot of my relationships. And I did suffer because of the choice of masking. And it's actually a human experience. A lot of people that I've come into contact with, whether it's through the personal development programs that I've run previously, so I did run a number of women development programs in the past, a lot of the participants shared experiences about the suffering that comes with compromising or masking yourself or not living authentically. The damages that it does when it comes to, let's say, your profession, or when it comes to your relationships, when it comes to your dreams, realizing your dreams. Masking is like a disease, and I've heard that from different people from different backgrounds. And I've also shared that, I've lived that. I mean, what do you think is, for what your personal experience? How do you? What have you seen as the masks that the people that you've come across? Like,
well, there's different things. That's what I wanted to ask you. The mask that you personally wore, was it the way that you acted, or was it the way that you dressed, or was it the way that you interacted with other people? What was the mask for you?
Oh, it was actually a multifaceted mask. It was the way I acted, and it was the way I also presented myself to others. So one of the masks, one of my favorite go-to masks in the past was hair extensions. Now, hair extensions are worn by African women as an expression of culture and personality and art, and so it's actually a positive thing. It serves the community, and a lot of women, a lot of people who have lived amongst African women, see different hairstyles, and African women changing their hairstyles all the time, and that's just part of our culture, and that's fine. But for me, I actually took that very innocent symbol of cultural expression, of artistic expression, and I used that to mask myself. So I covered my natural hair because I felt that it stood out, and it did not look like the majority, and I did not want to stand out anymore. So that was one of my go-to masks. So I would hide my natural hair under hair extensions so that I could belong. And every time, unbelievable.
Because I look at you, for those of you who don't know what Lilian looks like now, she's the most beautiful woman with the most amazing hair, and you've completely embraced who you are and obviously thriving authentically. What was your turning point to pulling off those masks and becoming that authentic self?
Oh, I think the turning point was, it actually took a number of years to get to this point. I feel like there were many small turning points along the way, but there was one major one that was quite symbolic. I remember going back to Kenya to visit my family in 2012. And I was getting ready to run errands with my mom. And just before I left the house, I had this routine after doing my makeup, get my mask on, which is my hair extension that I had crazy fun wig that I used to wear. I love that wig. And just before I put it on, my mother just stormed into the room, and she was pleasantly surprised. My mom was a little bit nosy, so that was just that's our normal interaction. And she was pleasantly surprised, and she's like, "Wow, I've not seen you with the natural hair in a long time." And that was one of the things that made me realize, oh my goodness, I have been covering up for such a long time. And even prior to even going to Kenya, there were a couple of things where I was sick and tired of having my head tied constantly, and the weight of the wigs and the weight of the hair extensions, it became a little bit heavy for me. So anyway, when I got to that point where she's like, "I've not seen your natural hair in a long time. You should leave the house looking naturally," and that suggestion sent me straight into panic mode, because I had lived for almost 12 years masking myself. 12 years.
Wow.
And that 12 years did not happen it was not intentional. I actually compare it to, how you go into the water and you have a swim, let's say at Bondi Beach or whatever beach you're in, and you have the undercurrent. And the undercurrent pulls you away from the mainland slowly. And the next thing, you're too far away from the mainland, and you need to be rescued. That was my experience on masking, because I didn't realize that the undercurrent had been carrying me further and further away from the mainland, which I compare to my personal identity, my real identity. So when I got to the deep end, and my mother was then, she highlighted that I'd actually gone too far by that comment. Then I just decided I have to make a change. But I resisted her suggestion. She insisted that I leave the house for just even an hour or two. And I resisted that for a long time. And I decided to walk out of the house after a lot of insistence. And I walked out of the house without my mask of 12 years.
Amazing.
And that was just the most scary experience, but the most freeing experience. And I knew immediately something had shifted mentally, spiritually, and physically for me. And things completely changed for me from then.
It's so powerful when we really embrace that authentic self of ours. So many people listening are probably thinking the same thing, whether they come from a minority group or not. If they're not living their authentic self and they're wearing their own personal mask, how do we identify these barriers that stop us from living authentically and thriving?
That's a great question. For me, I identified the barriers when I started experiencing unfulfillment in my relationships. I was just so dissatisfied. I found that I was compromising myself and compromising the values that I had grown up with. I found that the person that I was behind closed doors was very different from the person that I was out there, and that caused a lot of dissatisfaction. I felt like a fake. I literally felt like a fake, that I had to wear the mask before I left the door, and just to, make appearances and be accepted. And I was exhausted. I was absolutely exhausted.
Yeah.
And that was one mask. That the hair extensions is one mask. There was another mask about playing it small. There was another mask around compromising myself in relationships. There were so many masks that I wore, and all of a sudden I had this suitcase of masks that I was carrying around me every day just to survive. So that was the way I knew that something was wrong. The dissatisfaction in my relationships, the unfulfillment, and also the health issues that I encountered.
You came back to Australia and you removed the masks, I'm assuming.
Yes.
How did your life change? How did your health improve?
My life completely changed after that symbolic event. I believe that I started developing courage. And the reason why I'm gonna talk about the science around courage. I remember reading this somewhere, and it's just amazing. So we have fear. Everybody experiences fear, and it comes from a part of your brain called the amygdala. And it's a normal human experience. Then there's this group of scientists I can't remember what institute they're from. There's a research institute that found another part of the brain that is responsible for courage. Now, what they found was, and I'll call this part of the brain I'll call it the courage brain, because it's got a very long scientific name that I'll not even pretend to try and pronounce. So I'll call it the courage brain, and I'll call the other part of the brain that fear comes from the fear brain. So what the scientists found was that participants that were subjected to snakes, the ones that exercised courage, were able to, when that part of the brain was activated, when the courage brain was activated, it suppressed the physiological effects that the fear brain presented. And that paved the way for them to take more courageous acts. Whilst the other participants that were very fearful of the snakes, and they chose to avoid them because they succumbed to the physiological fears or the physiological effects that came with the fear brain. So the difference is when you have that part of your brain firing, so the courage brain firing, then you're able to push through the fear. You're able to push through the fearful events, able to push through that and have new experiences. And like a muscle, you get to exercise that and you build that up. So for me, unmasking myself in Kenya and coming back to Australia and presenting myself as an unmasked Lilian, an authentic Lilian, meant that I was able to push through the fear each and every step of the way, because I'd seen what I'd achieved in the past, and I could just keep pushing through. And then I started realizing I was becoming more courageous and taking more bold steps in my career, in my personal life, and my life completely transformed. My health completely transformed just by the simple act of not wearing my wig of 12 years.
How did the people around you respond to the real Lilian when you came back to this country?
It's interesting. So the people that responded to the masked Lilian, the wigged Lilian, I had 50-50 response. Some people were not as enthusiastic or not as supportive. And that was a bit of a downer for me. But at the same time, I actually focused on the bigger why. Why am I doing this? I know where I have come from. I know the pain that I've gone through. I know in one of your podcasts, you talk about growth through pain.
Right.
I experienced that growth through pain. And for me, it was not an option to succumb to other people's views, people who did not support my journey, and regress to being to going back to where I came from. So for me, it was about pushing through and focusing on the supporters that I had in my life. And I had quite a few, and that was really important in my journey.
Exactly. And you know what? The ones who weren't supportive, that's a gift as well, because you can let those people go, and you can consciously make that decision that you know is right for you, that those people no longer serve you in your life, because you are being the real authentic person of yourself. And if they don't like it, then they don't belong in your life.
That's right.
Yeah.
That is right. And that's all part of the tribal principles that I teach people, which I'll share shortly. The importance of having the right community around you to support you to live authentically and thrive.
Absolutely. Well, tell us about this tribal framework, these 5 African tribal principles that you use as tools to embrace our own differences. Take us through them.
So the reason why I actually use these tools is because I grew up with this tool. So I'm actually sharing my lived experience and sharing that with others, because I've seen it work where I come from. And the African culture is one of the oldest cultures in the world, and these tribal principles are very familiar to many Africans and many people who are close to the African culture. The very first one is tribe. And we hear the word tribe being used a lot in Western countries. And in Kenya, basically, a tribe represents a diverse community of people that share the same values and beliefs. So for me, being able to apply this principle in Australia, it was really important that I created a tribe-like community of people that share the same values and beliefs when it came to living authentically. And establishing that community was critical. It was critical in my foundation because I knew that I had to have the right people around me to support me. And the constitution of my tribe, the people that made up my tribe, were inspired by the words of motivational speaker Jim Rohn. And he said that we are the average of the 5 people that we spend our most time with. 5 people that we spend our most time with. Yeah. So for me, it was important that I focus on the supporters, the champions that understood authenticity, and that tribe-like community is actually referred to them as my Australian tribe, because they were critical in supporting me in this authenticity journey.
I love that. And it's so important to have that support base around you.
That's right. And having the right tribe to support you, and your audience might already know this, or might be going through a season of maybe change and transformation. Because sometimes I feel that depending on the season that you're in, different tribes serve you and they serve different purposes. So it's actually being aware of where you're at in your life and what tribe you need to support you to continue living authentically as you evolve as a human being.
Absolutely.
The second principle is elders. So Kenyan tribes are led by the older generation because of their wealth of life experience. And just like quite similar to Australian culture, where the older generation would, provide leadership and provide guidance. So Kenyan tribes are quite similar to that. And what the elders do is provide guidance to tribe members to make sure that they uphold traditions successfully. Now, I remember growing up seeing my family seek the elders' counsel on pretty much everything. Things like finances, relationships, conflict resolution, and so on. And that's the role of the elders. So that the provision of counsel is really important. So coming back to Australia and applying this principle meant that I found mentors and coaches that demonstrated strong leadership in authenticity. And whether it was on a personal level or professional level, it was important that they demonstrated strong leadership in authenticity, because I had a role model to follow, and I was able to get guidance from these people that had been successful in their lives. And I refer to them as my Australian elders.
I love that.
Now, Australian elders, I know it's quite, if you think about my Australian elders they look very different. You've got an Indian, you've got Lebanese, you've got a white, a female. They're just diverse, like very much like my life, and I love that. And these people have been critical in my life and holding me accountable in the transition of living authentically.
And they can completely open your eyes to new things that you otherwise would not have seen yourself.
Exactly. The blind spots. And because of their wealth of experience, it's really about leveraging that life experience, the lessons that they've learned, the mistakes that they've made, the successes that they have achieved. We can actually capitalize on our elders to provide us with guidance to living authentically. The third principle is language. So Kenyans, as I mentioned before, there's 43 tribes in Kenya. And each Kenyan tribe speaks a unique dialect. So if we didn't have the 2 national languages, Swahili and English, the 43 tribal groups will not be able to communicate effectively. So language is really important for us. It's important for tribal members to actually communicate internally, and also for the tribal members to also communicate externally with other tribal groups. So for me, with this appreciation for language, I chose to replicate this principle by being open and vulnerable in my communication with my Australian tribe and elders. And the vulnerability was around authenticity. The communication and the openness was around authenticity. The failures and the strengths and the successes and the wins that I was getting along the way, it was really important that I had the right language to communicate with my tribe and elders to provide me with support in my journey to living authentically.
It's so true, because language can really craft the experience for not only for yourself, but for the people around you. If you speak positively, if you speak negatively, if you speak, the different types of manners that we can speak in can really craft what the outcome can be for the experience that people perceive.
Absolutely. And when there's a lot of theories out there around language. When you look at the religious side of things, the Christian faith, they talk about the power of words and language and how that can shape your world, and the importance of being responsible with your words, being responsible with your language, because that can actually shape your reality. There are psychological theories around language, and the importance that language plays in creating the life that you live. Philosophical theories as well. So language is critical in humanity. It not only connects us, but it also can shape our world. We've seen language being used in other parts of the world right now that's causing distress, that's causing the rise of right-wing movements. It's causing disruption. We've seen language being used positively and negatively. So I think it's really important that that same appreciation is held when it comes to living authentically and thriving as an individual.
The wrong language can cause so much fear, and the right language can cause so much hope and so much love. So it's critical that we choose the right language.
Absolutely. And the unifying language as well. The fourth principle is something that is called Harambe. And it's a Swahili word that means collaboration. So you probably heard of the word Harambe somewhere, because apparently there was an animal in one of the zoos that was called Harambe. I can't remember which zoo, but it was it's a word that has been thrown around in Australia. I've heard it a few times, but the actual meaning is collaboration. It's a Swahili word, which is a language that we speak back in Kenya. And basically this word means collaboration. And that's something that a lot of Australians are familiar with. I've seen Australians rally together when there's a disaster. There's that sense of community and collaboration that happens. And for us back home in Kenya, this is very much the cornerstone of our culture. It's about collaboration. We are a collectivist community. So you can't do life alone. You actually have to do that with other people. And growing up, I remember seeing my family collaborate with the tribe and with each other on pretty much everything, from raising children to raising funds for somebody's education. And that's the norm. So for me, applying this principle back in Australia was easier, because Australian culture is around community, it's around collaboration. And I chose to apply this by collaborating with my Australian tribe and my Australian elders to ensure that I executed my plan to being authentic. And my plan of being authentic had many things. There were lots of elements that made up this plan. Personal development, it was a big part. We talked about personal development before. I invested a lot of time and money around that, and it was really important that I worked with my Australian tribe and elders to champion me along the way, to soundboard ideas, to get a deeper insights about what I was learning through my personal development journey. Another thing that constituted my plan was seeking psychotherapy, because I talked about the impact of living inauthentically on my life. And mental illness was a big thing. Developing anxiety and depression was something that was real for me because of the choice that I had made of masking myself and living inauthentically. So it was critical that I collaborated with my Australian tribe and elders, and they helped share the load in true Harambe spirit. They helped share the load towards the goal of me living authentically.
That's so beautiful, so beautiful. And what's their fifth African principle?
The fifth one is storytelling.
Mm.
So this is designed to pass on lessons across the tribe and generations in order for traditions to be maintained. I remember growing up and visiting my grandparents in their village, and we'd spend our evenings around a fire, and they'd tell us stories about our ancestors, and they'd use those moments, they'd use storytelling to pass on lessons to us about our traditions. And for me, growing up, that really gave me a good understanding of who I was and why we did certain things, why we undertook certain cultural practices. That was really important. That understanding, the storytelling was critical in helping me understand that, and also really reinforcing my cultural identity. So I chose to apply the same principle in Australia by sharing the lessons that I had learned along the way with others. There are so many people that I came into contact with that were struggling to embrace their difference. And the difference could be because of their gender, or maybe their upbringing, or their values, or their way of thinking, or their religious beliefs. Whatever the difference is, I found so many people that struggled with the same thing about embracing their difference. So my job was to share the lessons that I had learned along the way, the wins and the challenges as well, to inspire them to continue on with their journey to live authentically. And I did that in different ways. So through one-on-one engagement, also, or one-to-many. So as a keynote presenter, I still share my story with others. And I've shared my story with audience from Medibank Private, Melton Council, Parkville Correction Centre, and now with your audience. So I choose to continue sharing these lessons with others in order to inspire people to live authentically and thrive because of their difference. So I think there's a power in doing that. And what I found was, not only was I inspiring others, but the lessons that I was learning were further consolidated. So it was a win-win process for everyone.
It's funny about that, isn't it? When you do try and help people, you end up helping yourself at the same time.
That's right.
And you've completely empowered people to embrace their true selves. And I've heard you speak in front of a crowd, and it's absolutely beautiful. And you really awaken that inner self in everybody to try their best to drop all the crap, drop all the musk, drop all the fakeness, and just be you. You do you. I always say that to people. You do you, and everything else will just fall into place. I interviewed my favorite author. He's a spiritual leader, and he's a thought leader. His name's Neil Donald Walsh, and he wrote the series of books Conversations with God. And I asked him what he thought the biggest problem in the world was today. And his simple one-word answer was separation. We treat each other differently, and it causes so much angst personally and within the world. When if we all looked at each other as one and allowed each other to be true to ourselves and authentic, then so much of the world's problems would just completely disappear.
Yeah, I truly believe that. I believe that. That's so beautiful, and that is the truth that I stand on. That is what I believe in, and hence the journey that I've embarked on, because this is one aspect of my life that I've experienced, discrimination and challenges. But there's so many people out there who are undergoing suffering because of either the barriers that they've created for themselves, so the self-imposed barriers, so the masks, if you think about the mask, that's a self-imposed barrier, or the external barriers, so the things like prejudice and discrimination. But when you look at humanity is so beautiful, and the beauty comes with its complexity, and the complexity is as a result of our differences. The reason why each person is one of a kind is because of our differences. you think about your age and your gender and your cultural background and all of these things, they all intersect to create who you are, you as a person, you as an individual. There's no one like you. All of these different points of difference intersect to create somebody that is one of a kind. And I believe that being one of a kind means that every person is a minority in their own right, because there's no one like you. There's no one like you and me on this planet. So that means I am my own. I am a minority amongst every person, and the next person is in the same position. So when we start looking at things like that, that we actually have a shared experience, that we all are very different, and our differences are okay, and that we can actually learn from each other's difference, because what you have, I don't have, and I can actually learn from you, and the other way around, then that starts opening up the doors for inclusion, because we have this richness in diversity that exists amongst our community that lives authentically. And now we start opening up the doors for inclusion. We start becoming curious about each other. Teach me this. Tell me more about your thinking style. Tell me more about how you see things. Tell me about your experience. When we start having those conversations, then we start changing the world that we live in. That is what I dream of, and that is my vision, to actually get people to think differently, and then to spark that inclusion, that excitement in them, that, oh, I don't even have to be threatened by the person next to me, that their difference can be a good thing, and that we're all on the same page, we're all on the same level. You're a minority, I am a minority.
Got a beautiful big smile on my face hearing you say that, and it's really, really beautiful. I believe you've titled this the superior minority. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So the superior minority is a term that I use to describe somebody that has chosen to live authentically and thrive because of their difference. Because I talked about us being one of a kind, and because we're one of a kind, I believe that we are a minority, but we can only be our most superior selves if we exercise authenticity. So that's why I've combined the two. You can be a superior minority by living authentically. You can be a one of a kind person and live authentically and thrive because of your difference. So that's why I chose to actually use those words. And you also, at the same time, you also don't see those words being put together. If you do a Google search, you never see superior and minority. Actually, it's very rare to see superior and minority put together, because the word minority is usually seen as something that is inferior, something that is it's actually less than. It's actually not a good thing. It's a negative.
Very true.
It has a negative connotation. But I am elevating each person's status by saying, you are one of a kind. That means you're a minority. And when you exercise authenticity, then you become your most superior self. So you become a superior minority.
I love how your language is completely bringing hope into my life right now. It's beautiful.
Oh, wow.
Now you bring diversity into the workplace as well. Why do you think it is so integral to the success of a company by having a diverse workplace?
The business case is so clear. There's a lot of evidence out there that talks about what diversity and inclusion can deliver for a business, including increased profitability, improvement in productivity, enhancement in staff's health and well-being, innovation. The benefits are endless. And the companies out there that are doing it really well and are promoting diversity and inclusion. But at the same time, despite the evidence being very clear and the business case being very strong, a lot of organizations are stuck at that point where it's knowledge, but they have not taken action. Or if they do take action, there's no full commitment to really transform diversity and inclusion in their organizations. And as a result, they miss out on the benefits that are available to them if they were fully committed in making a difference in this area. So as I have seen organizations that have done it really well. In my past, I've worked for 13 years in the public, private, and not-for-profit sectors. There are organizations that do it really, really well. But unfortunately, it's about segments. You get organizations that do really well when it comes to gender equity and award winning. But then when it comes to cultural diversity, then there's a massive issue where you do not see accurate representation of cultural diversity within organizations when we live in a multicultural society. So for me, it's about using research and also sharing my personal experience, having that cross-cultural experience with organizations to really change their mindsets around diversity and inclusion, particularly using the African tribal principles, because there's a lot in there that organizations can adopt to create a diverse and inclusive workforce. So one of my other keynotes is basically showing organizations how to enhance business performance by using these 5 African tribal principles to create a diverse and inclusive workforce. It's a new way of looking at things. It's a fresh way. It's a unique way, but they are able to have strategies that they can quickly adopt and implement to completely change how they do diversity and inclusion.
I think that's so important. A new perspective on the impact of diversity is huge, and you're doing an amazing job. And obviously, one corporation at a time, sharing your message. And, if anyone does want to use you for a keynote in their organization, how would they reach you?
Well, they can reach me on my LinkedIn. So my LinkedIn profile, so they can search Lilian Kikuvi.
Yes, and I'll put that in our show notes actually for anyone who wants to reach you and reach out, because it is such an important message that you share, and the more organizations that embrace diversity and inclusion in whatever that may look like is the better. So thank you.
Absolutely. And there's also my Facebook page, so Lilian Kikuvi Talks, which is my business Facebook page. So you can connect with me via those 2 channels. And my website is coming up very soon, so look out. So hopefully by the end of this month, we'll have something. But LinkedIn and Facebook are the best contacts for me at this stage.
Wonderful. Now, before I let you go, I want to quickly ask what's coming up for you. I believe you've just joined the team at Future Crunch. Tell us a little bit about that.
So I recently joined Future Crunch, and the reason for me joining this amazing, amazing team is because of our shared passion to make a difference in this world. They're doing incredible work when it comes to just changing the mindset around the impact of science and technology, and also and transforming the conversation that people have around optimistic thinking and really help empowering people to make a positive contribution in the 21st century. So I am so honored to be part of this group of scientists, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders to actually empower people to live a 21st century that they're proud of. And my role as a speaker there is to help them achieve their mission, and also provide them with insights as a diversity and inclusion expert as well. So that's my next thing, is continue to work with Future Crunch, and also to continue to grow my business, to be able to transform mindsets of individuals and organizations so that they can capitalize on the benefits that diversity and inclusion offers them. So that's my next step, and I'm really excited about this new adventure.
Yes, and if anyone hasn't heard of Future Crunch yet, make sure you look them up. They're doing amazing, unbelievable things for humanity.
Yes.
Thank you so very much, Lilian. Your 5 tribal framework principles are absolutely outstanding, and something that we should all really remember. So it's our tribe, our elders, our power of words, our language, our harambe, and our story.
Harambe, I love that.
Yeah. And our story and our storytelling that we need to remember to bring into our lives. And thank you for bridging the gap for all of us who experience being a minority, and for giving us such strong tools to live life authentically.
Thank you very much for this opportunity.
I love hearing from all of our listeners. So let's keep the conversation going. Let me know what you thought of this episode. You can find me on Instagram at Things You Can't Unhear, and also on my personal page at Maritza_Barone. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the show and leave us a rating and review so that other people can find out about us more easily. And remember, be happy, be healthy, be conscious, and be kind.